Okay, so hopefully you've joined the right CPD. This is Bridges to Learning, an introduction to learning and teaching in RE. So we're going to explore a few things tonight, I think, that lie at the heart of teaching RE. But what I do hope is it just begins a conversation in your own mind, in your own department, in your own school, because we have people here from primary and from secondary schools. And so I hope it just begins to help you think through some of the aspects and some of the things that we will talk about, perhaps, or probably you will know already. But sometimes it's just nice to have things confirmed and also begin to remember why we do certain things and everything else that goes along with that. So if I can just introduce myself first of all. So my name's James Holt, as you will be aware. I currently am Associate Professor of Religious Education at the University of Chester. Now, what that actually means, I'm not sure, apart from the fact that I get to call myself Professor, which is always very nice and annoys my children sometimes. So I am responsible for religious education in the education faculty there. So my main role is working with those who are training to be RE teachers in the secondary school, also teaching on a master's course to do with RE, and then also with primary, those who are doing PGCE, and those who are doing a BA undergraduate. So I spend my time just talking about RE most every day of my life. So I was a teacher in secondary schools for over 13 years. So I'm not kind of coming up with stuff just off the top of my head. It is rooted in my experience and also the experiences I go around schools and work with teachers. I was essentially an advisory teacher in Manchester for 6 years, where I worked with primary and secondary schools. My contact details are there. So you all have my email address because you've all had an email from me with the joining information tonight. You've all found my website, which is updated and has, it's a very eclectic mix of all kinds of things, to be quite honest with you. But there are some writings about RE on there. And also my Twitter handle is at James D. Holt. So please feel free to come and give me a follow. I tweet about all kinds of weird and wonderful things. The other thing that I think I need to just let you know, a lot of the CPD that I'm doing over the next couple of weeks are based on some stuff that I've written. I don't expect you to go out and buy these, but just to let you know that these are around, and if you're interested in more information about them, if you can contact me. So the first one I think is misnamed, and I only realized it was misnamed after it was published, because just about everything in there is suitable for a primary school as well. It just explores the pedagogy and approaches to teaching RE in schools. So the bridges that I'm talking about tonight are actually in there. And then my latest book, which is Beyond the Big Six Religions. So some of you may be attending some CPD with me on Thursday, and that's based around some of the arguments in there. So I guess that just lays out a little bit that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Whether I know a lot, you can decide by the end of the evening, I guess. So, oh, I should have warned you, there's a picture of Michael Gove coming up. But as I'd just like to lay a little bit of a background to, or a basis for what we're going to go on to when we look at the bridges within RE. And I just need to begin by talking about Ofsted. And Ofsted in 2010 and in 2013 published 2 subject reports about RE. And in both of them, they said exactly the same thing, which is that essentially there is a problem within RE to some extent. And that is that teachers do the best that they can, so that's really positive. But at the same time, sometimes don't know why they're doing it. So they lack a purpose. They know they have to teach, for example, the layout of a synagogue today, but the overall purpose they struggle with a little bit. So in the midst of all of this, we have Michael Gove. And obviously when he was Secretary of State for Education, the generous view and the view that he would articulate is that he essentially just left RE alone because he thought that it could stand on its own. You could articulate that as well. He left it on the vine to wither. And there were lots of different things that he did. But in the midst of all of those things that were happening, he said, educating children about different faiths is of immense importance. And he was talking in a, I think it was National Interfaith Week. So if he'd have stopped there, I'd have agreed with him. But then he carried on and he said, well, it's of immense importance in leading children to understand the history that has helped shape the values and traditions of this country and in other countries and cultures. So the issue I have with Michael Gove in this case is that he sees RE to be about understanding history. And so it helps us understand things that have happened in the past, things that have shaped who we are today. But it's very much a historical look at what's going on. And Nick Gibb, who was then schools minister and is also currently schools minister, said something similar. He said around the same time, a pupil who understands the religious context can walk into a nation's great art collections and appreciate the nuanced iconography of paintings by men like Giotto and El Greco. And then he carries on with some other things. And he called RE a Rosetta Stone, which is a lovely image. And what he said is that RE is a Rosetta Stone to understand other subjects. Now, I'm not denying that it is. So I can go into the National Gallery in London with my children, as I have done, and I can stand in front of a religious painting and I can bore them with all the religious imagery that kind of comes along with things. And then I turn around and they're not there anymore. So it does help us understand art, it helps us understand economics, it helps us understand geography, anthropology, all of those things. But what's most important, and somebody actually raised this at the time, was RE is a Rosetta Stone not to understand other subjects, but to understand other people. Because religion is a lived experience, is a living thing today in people's lives. And it's so crucial to who they are and the things that people do. And so to treat it as something that is in history or only important as it relates to other subjects is problematic. Now, there's lots of different ways of approaching RE. We utilize lots of different subjects in its exploration, but it's about understanding other people. And just as one of my soapboxes, and I know people disagree, and so it's fine. There's an article from the 1980s by a man called Roger Hohmann, and he talks about the use of religious objects within the classroom. And he suggests that we shouldn't use the word artifacts because it suggests a dead civilization, something Indiana Jones-ish, if you like. And so religious objects, objects of devotion, objects used in devotion, kind of make it something. So it's just about making RE relevant and a lived experience for people today. Okay, that's part of my soapbox. And one of the important things is that sometimes when we look at RE, and we can all fall into this trap, and I've kind of fallen into this trap as well, is that RE becomes a pub quiz. And what I mean by that is the whole purpose of the lesson is, I don't know, to learn the 5Ks, the name of the 5Ks, or to be able to list the 5 pillars. So let me think of a pub quiz question. Okay, what was number 1? And you can answer this either using your microphone or using the chat. What was number 1 on November 10th, 1997? Any guesses? Or who was number 1? Let's go with that one first of all. Is there any suggestions from any of you who might be number 1? Whitney Houston, good guess, and an amazing artist, but no, take that, nope. Queen, Spice Girls is positive today. Oasis, Spice Girls is the overwhelming favorite by the looks of things. It was actually Barbie Girl by Aqua was number 1 on November 10th, 1997. Now, the reason I know that, oh dear, yes, indeed. The reason I know that isn't because I know every number 1 from 1950 whatever to today. It's because my eldest daughter was born on that day. So I know kind of that. So but sometimes that's the way we treat RE. If children are able to list some information by the end, we're happy. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think knowledge is important. And there's a big discussion in the RE world at the moment about knowledge-rich curriculum and all different kinds of things like that. So I do think subject knowledge has a huge part to play, and I'll explore where that can play a part later. However, if it becomes the end product where children are just able to list a bunch of facts, then we've kind of missed the point of RE. And so that's how I suppose I came to the construction of 5 aims of RE. Now, I think it's important for every RE teacher to be able to understand what they're trying to get out of it. And as I say, you may not agree with all of these, but it's important that you know what it is the end product is. Not of the lesson, though this will inform it, but of everything. What are we trying to do within the RE classroom? Whether it's with a nursery class or whether it's with a year 13 class, what is it that we are trying to do? So these are the aims that I came up with. To stimulate interest and enjoyment in religious education. Now, if you look at all of the official publications that are out there, you probably won't see this anywhere. But my argument is that if you don't stimulate interest and enjoyment, then you're not going to get the others. So it needs to be engaging, it needs to be relevant, and we'll talk about that later as well, but it needs to be interesting and enjoyable. If I think back to my own school days, the subjects that I loved were those that I was interested in and enjoyed. And what separated them? Well, I'm not sure what that was, but I do remember hating religious education till I was about 14. And a teacher and the way that it was taught suddenly affected and changed my view of things. So the second one is to prepare pupils, and just as a reminder, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them into the chat. The second one is to prepare pupils to be informed, respectful members of society who celebrate diversity and strive to understand others. Now, when I first wrote these, I wrote an iteration of them probably about 20 years ago for a department handbook. And this one was talking about, the second point. So the second point used to be tolerance, and used to be about people being tolerant. And if you look at the writings of John Locke, he has a view of tolerance that I completely and utterly agree with. It's great. However, it has begun to mean something different. And so tolerance is, well, I tolerate Manchester United fans. Okay, I recognize their right to exist, but don't really want an awful lot to do with them. And so tolerance is the very bare minimum we should be aiming for. I am joking about Manchester United fans, by the way. But essentially, it's the very bare minimum that we should be aiming for. So we should be looking for informed, respectful. Okay, Becky asks if we'll be getting a copy of the slides, and yes, definitely you will do. I will need to take the videos out, then I can circulate those as well.
Yeah.
And it is being recorded, so I'll post it online as well, so you can see the videos alongside those. Okay, the third bullet point is really important, and possibly the key one within all of these. And that's to encourage students to develop a knowledge of the beliefs and practices of religions even. And so that's really key. We do need the knowledge of the beliefs and practices. It's not enough to just develop skills. We do need a knowledge of the beliefs and practices. But then we kind of carry on, which is, and informed opinions and an awareness of the implications of religion for the individual, the community, and the environment. So the beliefs and the practices are tied to how they have an effect on people today. And so those two are linked, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the last two, to give all students equal access to religious education and provide enjoyment and success, and to develop pupils' own responses to questions about the meaning and purpose of life. Now, that could be quite contentious, but essentially we are teaching lots of different things about the big questions of life. And so we need to be okay with children developing their own responses to those questions, whatever they may be. And so we will perhaps talk a little bit about those later. Okay, before I move on to the bridges, are there any questions at this point or anything anyone would like to raise? Helen raised her hand. Do you want to speak or do you want to send a chat, Helen?
I'll speak.
Okay, thank you.
So I've been teaching, this is my 11th year, I think, of teaching. And when I did my PGCE, it was all about attainment target 1 and attainment target 2, you know, learning about and learning from religion. But what I've noticed in sort of within the RE community these days is the attainment target 2 learning from religion, which is what you're saying about pupils exploring their own ideas and what they can learn, has kind of been pushed aside. It's almost like it's not the done thing now, and actually we need to be more academic. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. They suddenly, with the removal of levels, everything kind of just disappeared. And I think with AT2, it almost became that you had to have AT1 and AT2 in every lesson. So learning about and learning from. So I think to some extent, it's a reaction against going too far. I think that it's just all about the children's own viewpoint. So I think the focus purely on knowledge and development of knowledge is a reaction against that. And there is a balance that can be struck. And hopefully, through the discussion today, I can suggest how that balance can be found. But it has been interesting because it kind of disappeared with no discussion whatsoever.
Do you think it's kind of a reaction against the fact that we weren't seen as academic enough? You know, with the whole being left out of the EBAC and everything. And this was people's way of trying to make us seem more academic, and that, oh, it's not about the kind of the wishy-washy, what do you think about life? It's more, we're an academic study of religion.
Yes, I think that is part of it. And I think it's, I mean, obviously there is a group on Facebook where many of you will have seen the advert for tonight about Save RE. And I'm not sure about that phrase. And I understood where it came from. But what does RE need saving from and saving to at the moment? And so it's about, reclaiming it, I think, from something that was seen to be fairly pedestrian. And so, well, it's a complete reaction against it. It's a complete 180. And I think there are still lots of positive things to be able to discuss the children's own experiences. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And so one of the problems that we still have today is the issue with how RE is seen, how RE is viewed by people within the schools. And so we have to be fighting RE's corner. And so how do we do that? And I think some of the things that we hopefully will discuss will show that those kind of things can be overcome once we, well, I'm sure all of us recognize the importance, but also are able to articulate it in a balanced way to the school community, because there's lots of different things that RE can bring, not just the personal development and not just the academic learning. There's lots of other things between those two as well. Okay, I'll move on. I think we'll discuss disciplinary concepts later. I came across this cartoon a couple of months ago, and I've been talking about bridges for a few years. I know there's a couple of people on here who did their PGCE with me a number of years ago, and I didn't. Sorry. And I didn't really talk about bridges then, but I've been talking about bridges for the last few years, and it's the idea that the pupil's there and we're there, and somehow we need to bridge a gap of where the pupil is to where we want them to be, to understand the things about RE that we want them to understand. And so we have to provide some kind of bridges. And so I'm going to suggest 5 bridges tonight that we can explore and that we can use. Now, some of them will be very, very familiar, and hopefully most of them are. But they're just things that we need to review in terms of the way that we teach, and also if you think they're important as well, because I'm not necessarily the person with all of the answers, it's just discussion. So the first bridge is with children's own experiences. And this builds very much on a constructivist approach to religious education. So in about the year 2000, and then it was republished last year, Julian Stern published a book, which was Teaching Religious Education, I think. And in this, he suggests that overwhelmingly, RE is constructivist in nature. Now, you will have heard probably lots of things about pedagogies of RE, but I think underpinning each of these pedagogies is the idea, or is the approach of constructivism. And so on the slide at the moment in front of you is Piaget's approach. And some of you will have done this to quite a great extent in university when you were trained to be a teacher. But essentially, Piaget's view within this context is that we have schemas in our brains, in our minds. And so I like to envisage those as computer folders. And within the computer folders, we have named them and we develop a schema or we develop a body of knowledge. So this child in the first image is developing a schema of what a dog is by looking at a book and by his or her parent telling him what it is. So a dog has 4 legs, tails, and an ear. And so then he encounters a real dog in the park, but gets some new information because this dog has those 3 things, but woofs and is furry. So this causes something called disequilibrium, a mind funk, if you like, just confusion. But he's able to assimilate that new concept into the existing schema because, yes, that's a dog. So there's new information put in. So if we look at things like Bruner's spiral curriculum and other things, then this is the way that children learn. So we know if we look at how, for example, the nativity story could be taught in early years foundation stage, hopefully when we teach it in year 2 and then in year 6 and then in year 8, that there's new things that are being added. So that's how we utilize that schema. But the second stage is to do with accommodation. And this is the idea that we're not pouring water into empty vessels. So the child meets another animal that he thinks is a dog because it's got 4 legs, it's got tail, it's got an ear, it's got ears, furry. But then it does something weird, it meows. And so this causes disequilibrium. Again, the same thing, but because it's something new and not accumulating knowledge, the child accommodates this new animal into a schema. And so if I'm still continuing the computer folder idea, copies and pastes that folder, renames it, gets rid of the extraneous information and puts the new information in. So what on earth does that have to do with RE? And I think sometimes when we teach RE, we can treat everything that we're teaching as brand new. So, okay, we've done Christianity and whatever that means. So we're now going to start on Buddhism and it's a completely new topic. But actually, there are things that we can do to draw on children's own experiences and recognize their prior experiences on which we can build. And the benefit of that is children learn better and more deeply if they can link it to something in their own experience. And so Judith Lowndes developed what was called the conceptual pyramid for RE. I've adapted it slightly, but essentially it's as you see it in front of you at the moment. And when we teach, whether we're teaching nursery or we're teaching year 13, what we want usually is to teach the top part of this pyramid, the concepts that are particular to specific religions. And there are examples that are given here: dukkha, resurrection, darshan, mitzvot. So these are specific things within specific religions. And then the lower 3 are concepts that are common to many religions, concepts that are common to all human experience. But essentially, where we start with most things are with concepts that are within the children's own experiences and are the basis of concept development. So we use things that children will have experienced different things. And so we begin with things that are in the children's own experience, and then we take those and we build on them. Now, I'm sure you already do this quite naturally. And it was interesting, I'd been teaching perhaps about 10 years before I came across, I'd never done educational psychology and all of this kind of stuff before. So coming across and thinking, oh, that's why I do this. But I'd kind of been a magpie and picked things up from different people. Okay, sorry, I've gone. So if I'm teaching symbolism within religion, and I've used specifically the example of the Sikh Kanda, because for me, and you may disagree, this is the most complex of the 6 biggest religions' symbols. And it's got 3 different aspects to it, as you can see. It's got the chakra, which is the circle. It's got the double-edged sword in the middle, which is also called the kanda itself. And then it's got the kirpans, which are around the outside. Now, I want children to understand the symbolism that the kanda has. And I could just chuck it at them and say, okay, what do you think this is? And we could use that kind of approach. So they're having to kind of whistle in the wind, if you like, at kind of, well, what is this? And trying to discover all the various aspects of it and what it might represent and all kinds of things like that. But I want to start a step back. I want them to understand the concept of symbolism. And this will be different for each year group, and some we might just skip over. And maybe this is a lower year group that we're doing this with. But I would start with these. And I had a discussion with somebody a couple of weeks ago who disagrees with this. And he thinks you should never say that a religious thing is like something else, because it belittles the religious thing. And he was also suggesting, well, you don't also say, for example, that a Hindu temple or Hindu mandir is like a church. Well, I personally don't have an issue with like. I have an issue with it is the same as, but I think what we need to recognize is this is a stepping stone to understanding. I have to call it a bridge, but it's a stepping stone to understanding. So by no means am I saying that the McDonald's symbol is the same as the kanda or as the cross or as the Star of David, whatever we want to insert in there. It is very different. However, the idea that it has meaning beyond what it looks like is important. And it also, all of those symbols have meaning that is ascribed to them. We have placed meaning on them. So I'm sure you all know what most of the symbols are. Just so you're aware, the star is the Dallas Cowboys. I had to choose an American football team because English football teams, I think we're all thick because they write their names across their logos. But we have all of those things. And the one I'd like to focus on just for a moment is the roadworks one. Because we know that if we see that sign from our experience and from what we've been taught, that there are roadworks ahead. But if you look at it and we're encountering it for the first time, it could mean that there is a man ahead who is struggling to put up an umbrella. And so you look at that and think, well, why do we know that it means roadworks? Because of the meaning that we have ascribed to it. So it might not mean that to other people, but it means it because that's what we've done. And that's the same with a religious symbol, is that it has meaning because we have ascribed meaning to it, or religious people have ascribed meaning to it. And so this begins a nice bridge between where the children are and where we want them to be. And so this is hopefully very straightforward. Another example would be to introduce, for example, the Buddhist festival of Vesak. And when we look at the Buddhist festival of Vesak, if we said, okay, what do you know about Vesak? Most people would look at us blankly. But the benefit of beginning where children are, and to some extent we can assume in the United Kingdom that children will at least know what Christmas is, whether they celebrate it or not. The culture of the country suggests that people have at least observed what Christmas is. And so we can begin with that experience and say, okay, this is Christmas. What do you know about Christmas? What do Christians do? And then we can move on and we can say, well, Christmas is like Vesak, or Vesak is like Christmas. What we don't say is Vesak is the Buddhist Christmas, but we can draw the similarities. Now, I think the problem arises when all we do is draw the similarities. We have to be able to identify the differences as well, and the very crucial differences that are there. So while both Christmas and Vesak are colourful, gifts are exchanged, cards are exchanged, and all of those kinds of things, both are completely different because one celebrates the life of the Buddha, one celebrates the birth of Christ. And so it's about utilising the different aspects that we have and recognizing the similarities and the differences and recognizing that it's just a springboard to other things. Now, we're going to watch a short video, and this is something I think was around in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some of you will have seen it, some of you will have used it before. But sometimes we have to provide children with the experiences that they will be able to understand as a stepping stone or as a bridge. And so that might not have immediately been in their own experience, but we can provide this as an experience. So as we watch this video, what I'd like you to do in the group chat, if you could suggest ideas of where this could be used or what it could be utilized as a bridge to understand.
Isn't it nice when things just work?
So there's been a few ideas within this. Most of them are plumping for the cosmological argument, which is, I think, yes, the evident place where it can go, that everything has a cause, but something has to have put that first cog in motion. Now, this isn't something, as I say, that's in their own experiences, but there are other examples. The interdependence in Buddhism, people's behavior can affect other people. There's another one, karma, how everything fits together. So maybe even the design argument, but also maybe the body of Christ and how everything has a role. So there's all kinds of things that we can use. And so it's keeping an eye out for different things that can provide that bridge for us. But we have to be careful, because sometimes all the different parts to a religion, thank you for that, Liz. Yes, that's really positive. So we have to be really careful, though, because sometimes we can assume children's knowledge. Now, I didn't mention before, but I perhaps should have done when we were looking at the symbols that are there, is the Ofsted phrase, cultural capital. And I think they've understood it in a different way to Bourdieu, who came up with the idea of cultural capital. And that's the idea that we each have different background experiences that enable us to function in today's society. Now, I think Ofsted understand it to mean, well, we have to give children those experiences to enable them to function in today's society, which I guess is there. But essentially, it's looking at ourselves and recognizing our own cultural capital that we have. And so the example that I always use in my Star Wars is there. I have a friend who was teaching Year 7 a few years ago, and she was talking about the nature of faith and belief. And she said to her class, look, it's like in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke tries to raise the X-Wing fighter from the Dagobah swamp. Now, some of you will have completely understood and visualized what I've just said, because you had a good upbringing and you watched Star Wars. Others of you will have never seen it and have no desire to see it and will be looking at me blankly. And these children at that time looked at her blankly, because this was something that was in her experience. But it's not something that children understood when she was teaching them. And so what she should have done is either not use it or to have shown them the clip. Now, we do have to be very careful. You'll notice the quote from Bob Jackson on the right. And when he did a study of resources used, or materials used, I think was the phrase, in the teaching of world religions. And he said that there's some detracting voice in increasing familiarity with these forms of learning can mean that they lack the power to engage that they once had. So we have to be very judicious, and we have to be very careful in the things that we use to help children understand things. Helen said, I made reference to Harry Potter as a messianic figure, and I had blank looks. I did at least assume they'd know about Harry Potter. Yeah, sometimes you're just incredulous. Unfortunately, I'm very old, and so I used Max Headroom last year, and last week even, and someone admitted that they'd not got most of my cultural references for most of the year. So I think we're all prone to those types of things. I usually begin when I'm teaching primary students or students who are going on to teach primary RE, is I usually start by saying, okay, who's seen Bruce Almighty in school? And the vast majority of them have, but they have no idea why. And I'm not saying don't show it, but what I am saying is when we use things, we have to signpost the students as to what it is we're doing with those different types of things, and that we're not just using them for the entertainment factor. But there are other things that we can use as well. So a couple of years ago, I went in to teach a year 3 class. And so when I was teaching the year 3 class, I used this. So let me just play the beginning of it.
Hi, my name is Emily Elizabeth, and this is Clifford, my big red dog.
Okay, now that is something that is in my background, is in my experience. Why? My children range in age from 13 to 22. So I've watched this, but it wasn't in the experience of the year 3. So I showed them a little bit. And then at the end of Clifford the Big Red Dog, there is always, at the end of every episode, this bit. Let me show you this.
Clifford and I know that everyone could use a helping hand now and then. That's why Clifford's big idea for today is help others.
So I wanted children to understand the concept of parables and what a parable was. And so obviously I could say, look, it's a story with a meaning, and then use one of the myriad of parables that Jesus taught. But I began with Clifford the Big Red Dog. Now, some people would suggest that I am wasting time. But I think that when you give children a reference point or something that they can hang their hat on, then actually the learning is deeper, and they're able to remember those things more. Because if we go back to the Vesak and the Christmas activity where we had the Venn diagram, the suggestion could be, well, there's a couple of reasons we do that. In a couple of weeks' time, when I say, okay, what's Vesak? Children will be able to come back to their schemas and think, okay, that's the one that's like Christmas, and so be able to tell us a few things. But also at the same time, it makes things less alien. And sometimes within religious education, we're struggling to help children understand the relevance of RE and what it means for them, because it's something that sometimes happens to other people. So when we see that religious people have the same concerns that other people do, then it becomes far more intelligible for children. And so we kind of move on, and we use those different kinds of things. So the second bridge is with prior learning. Now, it's possible, and sometimes I even slip into this when I'm talking about it, to say, well, isn't this just the same as the first one? And I think to some extent, yes, but bridge one is something that children just naturally have as a part of their kind of experience. Prior learning is the things that we know from our experience and from our teaching that they have done. And why is that important? Well, Ofsted again in 2013, I think it's in Realizing the Potential is the document. The most recent Ofsted report on English, Moving English Forward, noted that some teachers appear to believe that the more activities they can cram into the lesson, the more effective it will be. This was also common in many RE lessons seen. Superficially, pupils were active throughout the lesson, but the tasks did not build their understanding progressively. The purpose of and links between tasks were often not made clear. So I think there's two stages to this, if I'm honest with you. One is within lessons. So I observed a lesson last year where there were probably 4 or 5 different activities going on, and all of them were very engaging, but none of them linked with each other. So it was almost as, okay, well, you've done this, let's go on to this. So when I talk to my students, we talk about a learning journey and kind of, well, what is the learning journey of the pupils that you have in front of you? How does this link with this? And I know you know how it links, but the children don't. And so we have to help them do that. But then the other part of it is that it is possible, and I've seen this in some classrooms, where this week we are teaching about Vaisakhi. Okay, and so we have to do Vaisakhi today. No matter where we get up to, we're going to teach about Diwali next week. And then no matter where we get up to in Diwali, we're going to teach about Christmas the following week. And they're almost stand-alone lessons. And so the learning and teaching cycle is, well, let's help children understand where they're going with things. Let's build on what has come before. We don't teach standalone lessons. And so when we look at the scheme of learning that we have, the scheme of work that we have, there should be a flow to it that we know and are able to articulate to the students how things link with each other. And so I know this is probably teaching you to suck eggs, but it's really crucial. And sometimes we kind of fall into the habit of, well, okay, well, we've got to get this done today, and then we'll go on to this. And it's far more prevalent than you would think, because it's important that children understand how things learn. And part of that is to do, I think, with the removal of levels. I'm not saying that levels were amazing. They weren't. They became a shorthand that I'm a 7. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, I'm a 5. What does that mean? So levels weren't the be-all and end-all of anything at all. But in the removal of levels, we kind of lost a little bit of, well, what are our expectations of pupils at different ages? So in 2013, the RE Council published something called the RE Review. And some of you may have come across this already. And this was the idea that there were end of key stage statements. Now, in some ways, we'd come full circle. When I started teaching 20 odd years ago, we had end of key stage statements that then went to levels that have gone back to end of key stage statements. So every agreed syllabus should have some form of end of key stage statements. And the RE Council, I think, published 3 of them. And this is just the first one that's on the screen in front of you. And having an understanding of this, and I'll talk more about this in far more detail next week in the assessment course, having an understanding of this helps us understand how children make progress. Because sometimes when we look at RE stuff, learning new information becomes making progress. And I have an issue with that. Yes, it does form part of it, but we need to expect more, and perhaps more about skills and things that children are able to do. So I somewhere have a copy of my eldest daughter's Year 6 RE book. She thinks I've got it because it's amazing. I've actually got it because it's not very good at all. And the reason it's not very good is not because she's not very good, but because all it asked her to do was to retell some religious stories. So if you look on the screen that's in front of you at the moment, you will see that that's a Key Stage 1 skill. And even then it was a Level 2 skill. So she was, as an 11-year-old, being asked to just do Year 1, Year 2 work. And that's problematic, because what we need children to be able to do in Key Stage 2, for example, is to describe links between the stories and other aspects of the community they're investigating. So if they're doing the Christmas story in Key Stage 1, I just want them to be able to retell it to me. In Key Stage 2, I want them to say, well, how does that relate to Christmas? And then maybe there's a number of different things within Key Stage 3, which is to do with, for example, explain how individuals and communities express the meanings of their beliefs and values in many different forms and ways of living. So we can look at this and we can think, okay, well, this is how we pitch it. And sometimes we have some very pedestrian RE happening in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. Key Stage 1, for example, recall and name different beliefs and practices. Labeling a synagogue, not a problem. If that's all we're doing in Key Stage 2 and 3, then we're not building on what they've done before. And Val has mentioned that she's had to produce some skill progressions for subjects to stop this from happening. And that's really important. But I think they're already there, to be honest. And if we look around, sometimes and there's a discussion in RE at the moment, isn't there, about a knowledge-rich curriculum and what that means. But knowledge-rich doesn't mean that we have to do away with the skills that we are developing and that we're helping children develop. And yes, you're quite right, Helen mentions that RE is taught to varying degrees in earlier years, whether this is in primary school or actually in Key Stage 3, because RE is squeezed so much within the primary schools, and the training for primary school teachers isn't as good as it should be. So for example, when I do the undergraduate work with my students who are trained to be primary school teachers, they get about 20 hours, which is amazing, which is really good when you compare it to other universities, but actually in reality isn't long at all. And so there has to be a reprioritization of RE within the schools. And so, yes, there's so many other things that are pressured within a primary school curriculum, but it's helping teachers understand and head teachers understand why it's important. And that's not just to do with primary schools. That's to do with secondary schools as well. So we know from the NATRE reviews that there are lots of schools that are non-compliant within RE. And so as when we look at Key Stage 3 and 4, we look at the time that's available for RE there. Again, we need to be having discussions with our head teachers and our senior management about the value of RE or having children. And I remember one of my head teachers came in to watch me teach. He was fairly new to the school. And I kind of got a backhanded compliment. And he said, the thing is, James, I've never seen RE taught well till today. And then the next day he reduced the time that we had in RE in year 8 and year 9. Now, fortunately, the parents and the students complained and said, look, we don't need more ICT. We want more RE. But so there are concerns about the level of knowledge that children have. But I think if we look at the work that children are doing in literacy in primary schools, we can very quickly pick up the skills that they need to know. Yes, the knowledge needs to be built up a lot more quickly, but they do have some of the skills already that we want them to develop. And so it's about the things that we ask of children. And some of the comments are to do with just the amount of stuff we have to cram in. And yes, when we come to Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, there is an awful lot. But I think we can be a bit more judicious lower down the school. And what's really interesting for me is that when I wrote my book a couple of years ago, I argued that the way that we teach Key Stage 3, with all of the engaging activities that we use at Key Stage 3, should go up to Key Stage 4. And in reality, what's happened in the intervening years is the way that we teach Key Stage 4 has actually come down to Key Stage 3. And we have children who are being asked to answer GCSE questions at Year 7. And if you want more on that soapbox of mine, I'll talk about it next week. But it is about, and we have to do the best with what's there, essentially, is what we're being asked to do. So yes, I'm sat in an ivory tower and I can say we should be doing this and we should be doing that. But we should recognize also that we just do the best with what we can do. But I think we, in some areas, can do better. But I don't know your situations and everything else. But generally speaking, and so just looking on that. So I will talk more about that at some other point, but it is important that we fight its corner and that we recognize the value of RE and that we articulate the value of RE to others, so that they can see. Because if they're of my age group, which is 40 odd, the RE that they will have experienced in school will generally have been quite bad. And so we have to kind of help teachers understand its value and everything else, so that it can become better in primary schools and it can become better in secondary schools as well. Okay, excuse me. I'm just going to move on to the third bridge. And the third bridge is between beliefs, practices, and religions. And for me, this is possibly, well, all of them are key, to be quite honest with you, but this is key. Because what we do when we go to school, or when I go to schools, is I'll often see practices taught. And if I'm honest, religious practices divorced from the beliefs that are there are a little bit odd and a little bit weird, because they're divorced from what's there. So why do you do that? So for example, I don't drink tea or coffee as a religious thing. Now I understand, especially living in Britain, that's weird. But when I explain the religious beliefs behind it, it becomes a little bit more understandable. I'm not saying people will agree with it, but it becomes a little bit more understandable. And so we have to have practices and beliefs together. And Daniel Moulin said, in some situations, and this one here, it is possible to teach practices without reference to the beliefs that underpin them. Moulin reports this presents a skewed view of religions where the boring, observable parts are the starting point, while the adherent is thinking, if I were telling someone about it, I wouldn't start that way. They start in the wrong place. They start with the rules of religion. And this is something, again, that Ofsted said in 2013, which is that sometimes there's a superficiality to the learning. And the very last thing, the impression that pupils are sorry, I need to move something off my screen, left with is that religious attitudes are determined by a series of proof texting activities rather than a rational outworking of deeply held beliefs. Because we kind of just say, okay, they do this because of this scripture. Well, actually, it's a lot more deeply held than that. And so we need to explore the beliefs that are there. And I'll explore a little bit more about that. And part of that is to recognize the messiness of religion and the lived reality of religion. Because we have to break out the chocolate box. And by the chocolate box, I mean the sanitized view of religion. This is where everything is the same. So all Muslims pray 5 times a day. All Christians believe in the Trinity. All Buddhists follow the 5 precepts. All of those different kinds of things. And this has its kind of background in a colonial attitude. And what happened is that people in the past have tried to articulate what a religion is by articulating what Christianity is, and then imposing that structure on other religions and also within Christianity itself, and it doesn't fit. And Jonathan Smith suggests that a religion is not a native category. It's not a first-person term of self-characterization. It's a category imposed from the outside. And what he means by that is we've tried to fit religions into neat little boxes. And because it's a lived reality, they don't fit into those boxes. It's messy. So we have the idea, and it would be very nice if all Christians and all Muslims believed the same things and did the same things. But that's not true. So we have people in different religions, for example, that not all Hindus are vegetarian. Now, that doesn't fit with our neat little box that says this. So how do we approach that? How do we recognize the beliefs that are different, but also the beliefs that lead to different practices? So, for example, within Islam, obviously, most Sunni Muslims will pray 5 times a day, whereas Shia Muslims will tend to offer 5 prayers, but at 3 times through the day. And so we have beliefs that have led to different practices. And so we have to be able to explore those beliefs. Now, sometimes this next picture, the story of the blind man and the elephant, which comes from Jainism, is used in a way that I think is incorrect. And this is the idea that all religions, well, so for example, number one is Buddhism, number two is Christianity, number three is Hinduism, and they're just looking at the different bits of the same thing. I think that's a problematic view, if I'm honest. And when I use the blind man and the elephant in the story, that they're all looking at different kinds of things, and the elephant itself is Christianity, or the elephant itself is Buddhism, or the elephant itself is Hinduism. And when we teach, for example, Christianity, we teach the general outline, because that's all we can do. And so what we do is we kind of say, okay, well, the Christian belief in God is the Trinity. And I would suggest that probably we don't look at the intricacies of the different views of the Trinity until Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4. But in early years foundation stage, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and all the way throughout as well, we use the words that most Christians believe in the Trinity. I will explore this a little bit more on Thursday and Beyond the Big Six, but it's about the idea that as teachers, we don't draw or define the boundaries of religion. We just have to accept that religions are messy and do different things. So for example, the elephant itself is the Christian belief of the Trinity, but the tail are, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, Unitarians, Latter-day Saints, all of whom don't believe in the Trinity, but would identify themselves as Christian. Now, I did meet with someone once who told me that there was no such thing as a non-Trinitarian Christian, because if you don't believe in that, then you're outside of that realm. There's all kinds of issues with that statement. But as a teacher, we have to just recognize the diversity within religions as well. And we do that by talking about the different beliefs, but also using most, many, and some, and everything else that go along with that. But also showing the beliefs that underpin the practices. Because as I think someone, I think Helen has said, I have to keep telling them that beliefs are individuals, and it's largely up to them to interpret the teachings and choose how to behave. And that's really, really key and really important when we're teaching, because it is about the outworking of those beliefs. Now I have, I'll skip over that. I have a friend who goes into school and talks about Sikhism. So he will get a call from a school, whether it's a primary school, whether it's a secondary school, whether he's going into reception or year 13, and he will be asked to come in and talk about Sikhism. So he will normally say, of course, not a problem at all. What would you like me to talk about? And 99 times out of 100, he is asked to talk about the 5Ks. And I have nothing against the 5Ks. They're important symbols of Khalsa Sikhs. But if all we do is teach that Sikhs wear those 5 things, yes, it helps us identify who a Sikh is, but it doesn't give us the beliefs that underpin it and explain why they would grow their hair long, why they would wear a steel bangle, what is the symbolism behind that. We have to understand the beliefs that underpin it. And we also have to recognize that while some Sikhs will hold other beliefs, they may not actually wear those 5Ks as well. And so we explore, for example, the nature of God, or the nature of Waheguru. So there's only one God, he's timeless, without form, so he's eternal. And so we can then begin to link that with the shape of the kara and the steel bangle, so that we can understand why those there. We can also discuss issues surrounding Miri Piri, or Saint Soldier, the aspects of the 5Ks that remind us both of the Sikh's identity as a saint, and so believing in God, and then also their responsibility as a soldier, where they're called upon to defend their faith in the way that they live their lives. And so it's important that we understand those. Now, we're going to watch a short video. It's from TrueTube, so some of you may have seen it. It's designed for Key Stage 1, but it shows very simply what I've been talking about how we can very easily show the beliefs that underpin practices. There is a health warning with this. You will see that there's a blue puppet. He has the most annoying voice in the world, so I apologize for that already. But if you look out for kind of the way the things that the beliefs underpin the practices are there, there's also a little part that explores building on children's own experiences as well.
Wake up, Blue.
Hello, Charlie. Hello, you.
Are you hungry? Would you like some of my grapes?
Yes, please. One for Charlie. One for Blue. One for Charlie. Two for Blue. Ah!
That's not very fair.
Why isn't it?
Because you've had more than me. Blue.
Why is it so important to share everything equally?
Because it shows that you care. I learned about it in school today. This is a picture of a Gurdwara, and here Sikhs treat everyone the same.
But why?
Why don't you come with me and find out?
Zippy zip, let's go on a trip.
Hello, Pavandeep. Hi, Charlie. Hi, Blue.
What is this place? Where are we?
This is a Gurdwara and it's a Sikh place of worship.
What happens here?
People come here to pray to God, and even though we can pray anywhere, people prefer coming to the Gurdwara because there's more people around. And also we like to listen to the Sikh holy book, Guru Granth Sahib, being recited and hymns being sung.
Why did Charlie have to take off her shoes? And why do we have to cover our heads?
We take off our shoes to show respect, and we cover our head to show that we're humble and we don't think too much of ourselves when we come to talk to God.
Why does everyone sit on the floor?
Everyone sits on the floor to show that everyone is equal and that no one is better than anyone else. The only one that sits above others is Guru Granth Sahib, the holy book.
Is that food being shared out?
Oh, that's Gra Prasad. It's a delicious sweet pudding that's given to everyone from the same bowl, and it shows that everyone's equal and it's a blessing from God.
What's this place?
This is the langar hall, which means the dining hall. Everyone comes here and shares a meal together. All Gurdwaras have a langar hall.
Why do you have a dining hall in a Gurdwara?
This is so everyone and anyone can share a meal together, because some people think that they can only have a meal with certain types of people. So this just shows that we're all equal because we sit on the same floor and eat together. Also, the food is all vegetarian because everyone can eat vegetables.
Yummy in my tummy.
Time to go now, Blue.
Thank you for answering all of our questions and for letting us share a meal with you.
This is for you. It's a Nishan Sahib. The word Nishan means flag. It can be seen flying outside of every Gurdwara.
Thank you.
So what did we learn today then?
Well, today we went to a Gurdwara and we learned that Sikhs believe everyone should be treated the same. That's why everyone sits on the floor in a Gurdwara and why everyone shares their food. Sikhs believe in equality because they believe that God lives in every person. Move over, Charlie. You've got more space than me.
Have I?
And that's what you call making a point.
Good night, Blue.
Good night, Charlie. Oh.
Okay, yes, some of you have mentioned how amazing TrueTube is, and it is. It's very good. That they have a different Gurdwara video to do with Key Stage 2 and 3 and different things there. But what's really important, if I relate this to the bridges, is if you look at the downloadable lesson plan that comes with that video, just as the video starts with it, is that the lesson plan starts with sharing and the concept of sharing that will be in children's own experiences. And then if just very simply, the linking of beliefs to practices is done just through the question why. Why do they sit on the floor? Why do they eat vegetarian food? Why do they take their shoes off? All of those things. And it just enables the beginning of exploring the beliefs that underpin the practices. So the practices begin to make sense. And so we look at all of those things. Oops, no, we don't want to watch that again. Work out how to move on. And it's not, oh, there we go. Okay, and so moving on as well, we've talked about kind of the beliefs and practices within a religion, but I think it's also important to make links between the beliefs and practices between religions as well. And so it is very incorrect to teach Judaism as a preparation for Christianity. But it would also do pupils a disservice if we didn't make the links between the two. Now, I often look at children's work, and I think this is despite what teachers are doing. And children are kind of Christianizing Judaism in the way that they answer, because they just kind of can't get their heads around things. But it's important when we talk about the different religions. So then when we talk about perhaps the Christian story of the Nativity, and then we look at the Muslim view of the virgin birth, we can draw similarities and differences between the two. But when we look at reincarnation within Hinduism, we can also look at it within Sikhism, but also draw differences with things within Buddhism as well. And I'm saying I get a lot of the Jewish heaven or the Muslim church, yes. And I remember my very first year of teaching, apparently the Bible was written in Arabic, and Jesus was born in Mecca, and children, because we taught two religions. So it just develops over but it's important that we do draw the similarities and differences. Now, I have a huge bugbear that religions are not the same. And I'm not convinced they all worship the same God either. So, for example, the greatest truth within Christianity is that Jesus is the Son of God. But the greatest sin within Islam is the ascribing of partners to God. So how can they be the same perception? And so it's about looking for the common features, but also recognizing the differences that are there. And so one story I often use to do this is the story of Abraham himself. Obviously the father, if you like, of the Abrahamic religions. And so we look at this, and Helen's just mentioned about the Ninian Smart 7 dimensions, and yes, and so this would form into the narrative part of that, but it gives people a sense of their identity. So obviously, Abraham's story is that he made a covenant with God, with the Almighty, that he would serve him. And at the same time, he also received the promise that he would have numberless children, or numberless seed, and also the land of Canaan. But by the time he was old and his wife was old, they had no children. And so Sarah suggested that she give Abraham her servant, Hagar. And so therefore, Hagar had the son Ishmael. Now, I know there's all kinds of issues within just that whole statement that I've done. But what we also do is a number of years later, Sarah is able to have Isaac. Isaac means laughter because she laughed when she first found out. And then Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob got the birthright off Esau because he sold it, and then Jacob had 12 sons. He did have daughters, but they're rarely mentioned. And so we look at this and we think, well, why is this story important? Well, obviously we know the descendants of Jacob are seen to be Jews today, and the descendants of Ishmael through the Prophet Muhammad are seen to be Muslims today. And then we see the land of Canaan is Israel and Palestine, and we think, okay, so how can this issue be solved, and whether it can actually be solved? But then we take it back to the original story, and we look at the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac in the Torah, and that's there. But then we look at the story of Abraham sacrificing actually Ishmael within the Quran. Now, the Quran doesn't name Ishmael, but says the only son. And Muslims would argue that there was only one, there was an only son. So we have this story, and we can compare those. Now, someone's mentioned that they do a features of the world religion, so they can draw the commonalities. I think that's really important and really good. But at the same time, we need to be, I guess, careful of not trying to push everything into the nice little boxes that we have, and recognize that actually they don't necessarily all fit into those. But drawing these commonalities, which is what you're suggesting that we do, is really positive and really good. Okay. And I think what's important is that people can understand that when discussion takes place between religions, then it becomes much more positive, and holiness being discovered through encounter, which is how Jeff Teese describes it. Okay, bridge 4. We've probably got about 10 minutes left, I think. Not because of time, but just how long I think we'll be talking for. And this is with local, national, and international communities. And this is real, again, everything's really important. But I remember going to watch a lesson, and the lesson was about Hindu funerals. And the film clip that was used for a Year 4 class was Sue Perkins' Ganges. And that's an amazing documentary. I loved watching it. And the funeral that took place for Hindu funerals was a big funeral pyre on the banks of the Ganges. The body was placed on it, and then and then some of the holy men were washing themselves with the ashes from the cremation that had taken place. And my issue was that it had gone straight global rather than looking at what had happened on a local perspective. And what's important is that, for me, the vast majority of pupils' lives, I'm not going to read through all of this, don't panic, are spent building their identity within the first 2 levels of society, with school being replaced by work, so work and home. But however, it's possible for RE to have as its focus a global society. Religion becomes an esoteric phenomenon that happens beyond the pupil's own experiences. To some extent, this can build up a caricatured view, an irrelevant view of religion, which remains alien to the vast majority of pupils. Consider that pupils only learn about the general way in which religion is practiced. This might be termed the chocolate box view of religion, a view that is static and unchanging. If, as the ethnographic approach to RE suggests, pupils are exposed to the practice of religion by individuals, particularly in the local community, then its relevance and applicability is undeniable. So we have to use authentic voices. Now, that was just a very long way of saying, essentially, we need to look at local things. Now, someone's mentioned, yes, it's problematic when you live in a community that is overwhelmingly perhaps white Christian. However, we then move outside, and we don't move outside to the global, we move outside to the regional or to the national. And so we use British representations of religion. Because if I was doing the Hindu funeral, I'd have looked, well, Hindus use the crematorium down the road, just as other people would do. So it's about recognizing that the esoteric view or the caricatured view of religion is problematic. Yes, it has its basis, but it can build stereotypes. So it's interesting because every year I take my students, for the last few years anyway, to Manchester, which isn't the most gorgeous place in the world, even though I live here. And we visit probably for 2 to 3 hours different faith communities, and we spend time just chatting. And the students are always overwhelmingly surprised by Judaism. because they have in their heads the view, and these are religious studies graduates for the most part, what an Orthodox Jew looks like and what they do, and then what a Reform Jew looks like. And then they actually, because of the two shuls that we go to, are surprised because they would have suggested that the person that they talk to, the rabbi they talk to in the Orthodox shul, is actually more liberal than the people that we talk about in the Reform shul. So it's interesting to recognize it's a lot more messy and not as straightforward as we see. And the Jewish rabbi who is Ashkenazi but not Haredi, he doesn't have the ringlets, he doesn't wear the top hat, he doesn't wear all of those things. And so we have to fight against the stereotypes. And someone suggested that, yeah, it can be seen to be more authentic if we show them how it's practiced in the country of their origin. And I can understand that, but actually for our pupils, I think what is most important is they see how the religion is practiced within this country, because then it becomes less alien to them, which is, I think, what's... And so we do those types of things. And then, sorry, I've lost the train of thought. Someone's asked, how do we teach children that it's messy though? And I think just not giving the giving the diversity of views within the religion, or the diversity of representations. So I had a student a couple of years ago who put together a PowerPoint of prayer in Islam. That was the focus of the lesson. And on it, they had a white Muslim praying. And the teacher at the time, the mentor at the time, said, no, take that off. That will just confuse the children. For them, Muslims are Asian. And for me, that's exactly why the diversity of representation in the images that we use are there. And I think if we use the authentic voices and we're able to have people come and talk to the children, then we can then they can recognize themselves that actually, well, he said this and he said this, or she said that, and it's very different within this. Okay, so it's about using those. Let me just share with you this clip. It's from a film called Baraka, and this is I think using religion from their country of origin rather than home, and it has its value, it really does. But let's just look at this for a moment. Okay, and the reason I share that is there are some positive things for that can be used for, because I'm not saying don't do the global, but don't only do the global. I think is it's more important to do the local. But actually, if you saw, there were similarities. So we moved from an Orthodox Christian to a Muslim lady, both of whom were wearing headscarves, and so and you move from people who are praying to one another. So there are positive things, but if that's the only experience that of religion that we're exposing children to, it becomes something that happens elsewhere rather than something that is lived within the society in which we live today. Okay, the final bridge is with other subjects, and I think this is potentially very difficult because logistically it becomes difficult. But if we're struggling to fill, not to fill time, because we don't know, to find time, within our schools, whether that's a primary school or a secondary school, we could always do with more time. So if we are struggling with this, and even if we're not, it's important to make links with other subjects, because that enables us then to be freer to explore the things that are particularly religious. Now, what I don't mean is by RE becoming a PSHE a little bit heavier. That's not what I mean. It's about where there are legitimate links with other subjects in the curriculum, that we make those links and we teach alongside. So, for example, when we teach the Holocaust, if we teach the Holocaust within RE, sometimes it can become a historical view. And that's dangerous, because the historical view should be taught within history. But the challenge of faith, I think, that the Holocaust raises is really important. So let me just share with you from someone called Hugo Gryn. And Rabbi Gryn was a survivor of the Holocaust. And he said this, he said, "As I light the menorah in my comfortable London home, surrounded by our children, I go back to Hanukkah 42 years ago, the bitter cold winter of 1944, to a miserable Nazi concentration camp. From our less than meager rations, we saved our margarine. From bits of wood, carved out bowls for oil lamps, and out of a blanket and uniform threads, fashioned wicks of a sword. Then on the first night of Hanukkah, in our crowded barrack room, the melted fat in its place, we sang the blessings about God's miraculous saving power. And then disaster. Margarine does not burn, it just fizzled out. And my anger over precious and seemingly wasted calories and the less than good-natured teasing of non-Jewish fellow prisoners, I burst into tears. My father, who'd also saved his rations and whose idea the celebration was in the first place, tried to comfort me. He said, 'You and I have seen that it's possible to live as long as 3 weeks without food. We once lived almost 3 days without water, but you cannot live properly for 3 minutes without hope.'" And that's really the challenge of faith that brings. And we could talk about Viktor Frankl and others, but that's really positive. But then we look at other things, and sometimes we can combine RE with art or with design technology. So I was doing some work with some primary students earlier this year, where we were designing Moksha Chitram games and making them in design technology, and then exploring the concept of reincarnation within Hinduism, within RE. And so we could utilize the time that was available. Now, I don't know how that would work in your school, but it's looking for the opportunities, because it then frees up time for us to do more in depth or more things that are there. Okay, so those are my 5 bridges. So are there any final questions? So if you can take a picture or scribble down that address, it gives you an evaluation. It also gives you a download link to a CPD certificate if you would like it. Hopefully it's been useful, but are there any final questions or comments that you would like to make? Hopefully you found it valuable, at least for an hour and 25 minutes or so. If not, just thank you very much for attending. If you could fill in the evaluation, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will hopefully see some of you on the other things that are there. Okay, I will stop sharing just so I can see everybody's smiling faces. But thank you very much indeed. Feel free to leave if you so desire. But thank you for taking time out on I've forgotten what day it is, Tuesday evening. Please stay safe and well. I have had a question. Own knowledge and lacking to teach about the main religions. Is there a key text that you would recommend? Okay, there's 2. One's biased. So my original book, the Religious Education in the Secondary School, that has a chapter on each of the 6 big world religions. My latest book has some of the small ones. But the other book that's not mine is by a man called Stephen Prothero, Prothero. He's an American author. He's writing for an American audience, so obviously it's very accessible. Sorry if you are American. And it's called God is Not One, and he does an introduction to 10 of the larger world religions as well. So that's quite an interesting book to read if you would like to look at that one.